Hello, welcome to a Sonic Lab. Today I'm with Gaz Williams. We're doubling up because today we're looking at Bitwig, which is the new DAW on the block. It's kind of been much heralded, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the biggest release, isn't it, for a number of years, or certainly in terms of this is a, taking on Ableton Live, Logic, Cubase, etc. This is, going for the big guys.
It's kind of a hybrid of traditional linear DAW.
Yes.
Plus the kind of clip launch kind of vibe of Ableton Live 2. So we've got both that, added to the fact that it's multi-platform parity, which means all versions are the same across OS X, Windows, and also Linux, which is quite a big deal at this point.
Yeah, so like a Linux installation, for instance, you could have a computer that literally booted into this software, and that could be quite nice.
Absolutely.
To cut down on distractions.
So in this part of the review, we're going to split this up. In this part of the review, we're going to look at the kind of overview. So what do we got here then, Gaz?
Okay, so looking at the screen, at the moment, this almost resembles a pretty typical looking DAW, doesn't it? We've got our track list along the left there. We've got our arrange space here. And what we've got is we've got a bunch of shortcuts that can kind of open up various sections of the screen. So if I press B, that opens up the browser, which is, we've seen this in Logic and we've seen this certainly in Ableton Live. Obviously, Ableton Live has the browser on the other side of the screen. But from here, we've got various shortcuts. We can look at our Bitwig devices. So Bitwig devices is all our plugins that are Bitwig specific, but also VST, any VSTs you might have installed.
VST only, right?
Yes, no AU support, just VST.
And I think that must be because to get parity across all platforms, support a plugin format that runs on all platforms.
Yes, exactly. And then we can move across here. So we've got where we can look at samples, multi-samples, music, which I've got like my iTunes library, for instance. Clips, and you can have lots of bookmarks
and folders
for your own sort of files, etc. Okay, and then sort of finally we've got our package manager. Packages are sort of like Bitwig kind of parts.
They're sort of instruments with samples or collections of stuff. Okay.
And then here
Bitwig comes with a selection of instruments.
It does, and we'll have a look at those in another episode later on. But in detail, we'll have a little look at it now. But here again, we can just see, looking back at the screen, we can locate where our various sort of specifics are. So that all happens there. Now, so from our browser, and then underneath here with our browser open, we've got a few other things. We've got like a little project tab where we can put information about, and also, which I quite like, a studio input-output tab as well, where any of your connected devices can be easily got at, which is, I quite like that's in the browser.
Like audio interfaces?
Yes. So all your inputs and outputs and various things. Now we've just only got a Scarlett, Focusrite Scarlett attached to this computer at the moment, which is just a two in, two output. But also we should mention, connected via MIDI, USB MIDI, we've got the Nectar Panorama P4, which is just a controller keyboard with this one has specifically got a
if you've been watching Sonic State, you'll notice we had Tim Chandler came down from Nectar, and if you want to see it sort of specifically this with Bitwig, he's done a piece on it which is online now. I'll put a button maybe here.
Yeah, so that's cool. So this works very nicely. It's got this integrated mode. So we'll come back to that. So looking back at the screen then, so I'm just going to close the browser for a moment. If I press D, which is like devices, this opens up this bottom panel here.
That's like an Ableton style device chain that you can.
Yeah. So let's go to our instruments here, and we'll just bring in the polysynth. Now this is a cool. Well, actually, looking at the browser first, that's just one thing. When you select something, this is quite nice. If I select, say, the polysynth, then the presets of whatever you've got selected here appear
down
in the bottom here. Yeah. So
can you resize that browser window, or is it fixed?
Yeah, no, you can resize it.
Okay.
Okay. Dennis, that sounds like a nice preset. Okay.
I've heard good things about the polysynth thing.
Yeah, it's really good. So we can see then along the bottom we've got where our device is.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some differences now. If you're familiar with Ableton Live, you'll think, okay, that's how it works. Now, it more or less works the same way, but there's a difference. The difference being that we kind of expect the signal, like in Ableton Live, to flow through the various devices. Well, it sort of does that, but it allows for audio and MIDI to flow through it without stopping. So if MIDI flows through an audio device, the audio device doesn't need it, it'll just ignore it and it flows through.
But that takes us down to the track types, because we've got hybrid tracks.
Yes, so that's the next thing we'll look at. So what we'll do is, I'll go over here and we'll look at some clips and Bitwig drum machines. Now there's a lot of different drum machines here which are cool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that in, and this is a clip and a drum machine.
So it's like a, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's a pattern.
It's a pattern, yes. So let's have a listen to that. We'll just etc. Okay, so double tap on that and it opens, and this.
So we've got the edit window. That's very similar to kind of maybe the Logic way of working.
Yes, and Ableton Live. Difference being is we've now got this edit button, which if I click it, we now get like a full screen view, and that's quite nice because we've got our device along the bottom there as well, so it gives us.
Well, that's actually neat. I mean, I know it's not really fair that we compare this to lots of other DAWs because it's a new thing in its own right. But you can't, if you've used a DAW in the past, you can't help but do it. And this reminds me very much of the Logic way, where you can throw. You know, in Ableton, it's a drag because you've got to move the window.
You'd have to resize the window,
okay.
Yeah.
So it's a workflow thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to keep noticing lots of Ableton Live. More than anything, it's very, very similar to Ableton Live in many, many ways. But so it's quite interesting if we show what's different, really.
Right, okay.
Because you're going to come to this, if you're familiar with Ableton Live, you're going to be able to get around this pretty quickly. So I think it's quite important to sort of highlight these differences. So now, okay, so I'm going to hit the tab button. Oops, there was a little preview there of what's coming next.
Not yet.
So
they're colour coded as well, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes. And the colour coding actually is very useful for some of the features which are specific to Bitwig. Now, okay, let's bring in another. I'll bring in another one here, and I'll put it underneath. This is another MIDI instrument, a drum kit in this case.
So that creates a track and the pattern and instantiates.
Yes, yeah. So they're both playing together now. Now, if I now get a audio file, let's just find something here. Just some tambourine loop, that'll do. Let's just bring that in.
Is that clip now tempo matched?
Tempo mapped, yes, right. Yeah. So like
it does the warping and right.
Yeah. So we're playing these now. So we would expect that audio and MIDI would live on separate tracks. But look, if I was to take this and drag it on to our drum kit, we can see that MIDI and audio can coexist. And now this has changed. There's a small icon here which has changed to
very small, isn't it?
Yeah, so I can zoom in there. We can see now
a
MIDI track has got like a keyboard, an audio track's got a little wave, and we can see now.
Right, okay, so that shows it's hybrid.
This is a
hybrid
hybrid
track. How does that work
track.
in terms of mixer channels though? Because I mean, obviously, if you've got a processing on the drum kit, and do they share the same plug-in chain?
Yes,
right.
And this is what I was mentioning earlier, you see. So the plug-in chain, if it sees MIDI, it'll react to MIDI. If it sees audio, it'll react to audio.
So you could just throw lots of...
And it'll ignore it if it needs to.
But in terms of, if you want separate levels and separate other mix controls, you're better off having them on separate tracks, right?
Yes.
Right, okay.
I mean, you know, this is, again, it's a peculiar thing in terms of we're not used to that. We're not used to this coexisting.
Right.
So
well, I suppose, so for instance, you could say maybe take some sample phrases of a vocal and have a lead vocal as well, and then have a section which is just like maybe playback, and that's all going through the same channel strip, right?
Yeah, good idea. So what I'm going to show you now, though, is I'm going to move this tambourine track back. Something specific about the editor, which is very, very, very nice, and again, it's a different thing. If I was just to group select all three of these elements down the bottom here, I can enable something called layered editing. Okay, so layered editing gives us essentially
some MIDI layer and an audio layer, right?
Well, actually, I'm going to take out the audio for a minute. Let's just look at the two. We'll just look at these here. So we've got a little eye icon, which is similar to like a Photoshop kind of
like a layering. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So you know, we can see. So now, what I could do is I can view both
Both MIDI tracks.
Both
right.
MIDI tracks.
And they're color coded as
and
they
they're
are.
color coded, so it's like, so we've got like the orange and the pink. Actually, I'm going to open up the inspector. Now, this is something we haven't looked at yet. And then pressing I opens up the inspector. I'm just going to make one of these now. I'm going to make it really different color. So I'll make it like a green color. Okay.
Right, so
it gives us more contrast. Now, if we look on the editor now, and actually, let's make the editor look bigger, we can see both plotted against the same time. So you can edit.
That's really handy because quite often you might have, if you're constructing beats, you'd have like maybe a bass drum instrument and maybe some other bits, and you could, to edit them all together. You could do that in Logic. I'm pretty sure you can multiple select, and there probably are other instruments, but I haven't seen, this is neat.
Yes, so, but if I jump back now, if I did have the audio as well, and if I make the audio view, I can go down here, I can say background, and I can turn on the tambourine as a background.
Ah, okay. So you could match up events to audio transients and right.
And I think that's a very neat way of being able to, rather than having to zoom everything just for that purpose, just to be able to have that mapped on there so you can line things up. I think it's a neat thing. Now, here's something that's quite cool. If I wanted to just create a brand new, fresh project, I can just do like, Command Control N for a new one. Straight away, it's opened a new one. But if we look in the top right here,
it's tabbed.
It's tabs. So we can just quickly flick between the different ones. This new one that I've created hasn't been activated yet. I would need to activate it with this button, the Bitwig logo.
From what I recall, that means it activates the audio engine part of it, right?
That's right, yeah. So we'll activate the audio engine and it goes orange. So if we flick back to the other one now, we'll see that that's gone grey and this one is essentially in control.
So for instance, if you're working in Logic, which is my DAW of choice, sometimes you need to open two projects and kind of go, I need to copy and paste. But the problem is every time you focus the window, if you've got like a load of like contact instruments, it goes load. Right. Presumably this means that you don't, if you're not activating the audio window, it means you get much faster.
Yes, right. Because only one is active. Right. Can only be active at the same time. So that's a good example. Now, what you were mentioning there, if we look in our instruments, we've actually got single instruments like a kick. So I could bring in a kick, insert a kick there onto one track. There's a snare on another track. I'd say we'll look at these in detail.
So these are just devices. You're not bringing patterns in at all, are you?
Just devices, just devices, and a sort of like a hi-hat perhaps as well. Let's just get rid of that track. Okay, so we've got a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. So this would be a good example of where the layered editing is quite useful. So you can work on it, but you've got these as separate tracks. So you've got all your kind of audio controls for the mixer. You might want to have your kick as a separate mixer fader, but the fact that you can edit them all at the same time kind of
makes it a bit easier to work on as a whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. So. Okay, so we're just, again, having a little tour around things at the moment. Pressing tab, just like Ableton Live.
So this is like session view, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, and like, so if you're used to Ableton Live, tab, swapping between your arrangement view and the session view. Now, it doesn't call it session view in here, we're calling it arrangement and mixer. So it's actually calling this session view mixer, which...
Is there a mixer mode as well?
Yeah, so I can press M and it opens up a mixer so we can see...
So that's essentially session view without the clips, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, so let's go back to our mixer mode. Of course, a mixer is displaying at the bottom here. Now, I haven't found a way of resizing these, so they do look to be like these relatively small.
Can you do that in the actual mixer window, or is it?
This is the mixer window.
When they're down there, do you see what I mean? Can you
when you resize that,
right, okay. No. So you can't have a large mix screen.
That's actually as big as it'll get. Although
I suppose the thing is about large mix screens is you tend to see the plugin instances certainly in the kind of Cubase Logic, whereas this isn't working in the same.
Yeah, I mean, if I was just to let's just add a bunch of things here, loads of things here. I actually know that
starts to scroll. Oh, that's a bit.
Scroll.
Yeah. So I guess that's a limitation. I mean, not having a large mix window, perhaps.
Yeah.
But what happens if you want to add lots and lots of devices? Can you see them in the channel strip, or do you have to?
Yeah. It does grow as you add them.
So what happens if we have more than we've got there?
Yeah, it will. I think it will just continue to sort of.
Right.
It will.
Right, so it auto sizes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's okay.
So in our session view, or mix window, I should call it. This is a very, very familiar workflow, as I mentioned earlier.
Scenes and clips.
Scenes and clips, yeah. And and you kind of think, okay, well, this is looking rather like Ableton Live. What else is different? So you can combine those elements together. If we look in the arrangement view, I've just chucked a riff in here, and we can see here, well, and we can toggle this with this button here. We can bring in the scenes.
Ah, okay. But it flips the axis, doesn't it? So you've got
that's right,
scenes and clips. So
yeah. So the scenes, the scenes and the clips are running down
in that view, but in this view they run
horizontal.
Right.
So you might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, let's have a look. So if I just
funky worm,
funky worm,
2-step.
So at the moment, this barefoot track that's playing is playing from the arrangement. But if I just sort of drop in a fill,
it plays and inserts itself into the arrangement.
Yes. But what we noticed then was as it played, once it completed itself, it jumped back to the arrangement. And that's because this has got those launch characteristics. Again, a little bit like Ableton Live.
Follow actions. And that
follow
sort
actions.
Of thing.
But the nice one here is to jump back to the arrangement. And what we can see along this column here is these little buttons. These buttons here.
Right.
And what these buttons, they kind of control. So if I set this loop playing, this one doesn't have any follow actions. So this one will just keep looping.
So that's the same pattern.
Yeah. But as soon as I press this button, it swaps to the arrangement. Yeah. But this one.
And that's happened. So in the inspector here,
in inspector,
zoom that in, it's very tiny.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So we've got the
return to next action, return to arrangement after 1 bar. Right.
Arrangement. Yeah.
But you could set that
next
to
action to do. Yeah. So you've got various options that you can do.
So I'm guessing it's possible if you're in record mode. Presumably, when you're triggering those clips, do they happen on the timeline as well? So you can get a performance recorded. So that's where it's.
Yeah, and if we went into global record, what we'll notice now is that any tracks that are playing from here
I'm recording in them.
Will record into the arrangement.
Ah, okay.
Okay, which you'd sort of expect if you're used to the Ableton Live way of working. But I think because you've got those clips.
So is it possible to? I mean, how about recording into a clip or into the arrangement? What's the differentiation?
Yeah, you just. Let's just say we're going to arm this drum here, and so I just hit the.
Right, so then that's recorded into that clip.
Yeah, so it's in the clip, and then
you can do all your normal stuff like
trim it.
So you've been with it for a couple of weeks. I mean, we had a look at the overview, but in terms of how it feels to use, to arrange, record, whatever, what are your impressions?
Well, I've been using it with the Nectar Panorama, and it's almost got like the Ableton Push kind of functionality. It's very, everything integrated very nicely. So, you kind of work in this, and it's really quite nice. You think, oh, this is good. When you then move over and start editing what you've done and delving in a little bit, then you start sometimes hitting slight problems limitations where maybe expectation that it will do something.
Yeah, well, I suppose to be fair, you're a professional user of Cubase, Live, Logic, Reaper, so you've got kind of workflow, very specific workflows.
That's true, and I think it's a version 1 piece of software, and that really is something that you do have to bear in mind. You're comparing maybe Ableton Live version 9.1 to a version 1 piece of software. It's inevitable that it's not going to have everything, but that can lead to some frustrations, as I was mentioning. So I think that if you are an experienced user, then yes. Right. If you haven't used a DAW before, or you haven't used anything with a clip launching idea before, then maybe this is quite a good one, because being able to have it on that one screen, I think that's a little bit easier to get your head around. You don't like the Ableton.
I just don't get it. That's all. I don't get it so much. Whereas this I can sort of understand, because you've got the linear and the clip. Mm-hmm. Well, so I mean, this is, like we say, version 1. I think there's been one iteration since, hasn't there? There's been a few sort of service updates.
I think we're on 1.01 or something now.
So I think we're on
1.08.
1.08. So there've been a few service updates.
Yes.
It's available now. Price?
Well, it's £279.
Okay.
So it's not cheap.
It's not a cheap one, but I mean, perhaps if you're you do get some other stuff with it. So we're going to stop things right there. I hope you've enjoyed this overview. I want to say thank you very much to Gaz Williams for showing us around Bitwig. And there will be another episode where we're going to look a bit deeper at the devices and other things too. So thanks for watching.